Good morning, everyone. Before we get started, I just want to make sure that people can hear me okay. So the way I can tell is if you raise your hand, then I know you can hear me and the audio is working. Great, thank you. Welcome and thank you for attending the Office of Funeral Home and Crematory Registration Stakeholder meeting today via webinar. The date is July 27th, 2021, and it is 10 a.m. Before we get started, we would like to introduce the staff members from the Division of Professions and Occupations that are present. My name is Darcy Magnuson, and I'm a regulatory analyst with the division. Also attending is Zen Mayhew, Program Director. We will be facilitating this stakeholder meeting. Due to concerns regarding COVID-19, the division has transitioned to a platform that is 100% virtual, and we appreciate your flexibility. As many of you have been to meetings before, we would like to reiterate the importance of your comments today. DORA makes decisions every day that may affect your life and your business, so your input is vital in the rulemaking process. Throughout this process, our goal is to create regulations that clarify and explain legislation, ensure minimum competency to enter and continue to practice, and provide only what is absolutely necessary for consumer protection without creating unnecessary barriers to the marketplace. Your input will be part of the information that goes to the director as the director considers adopting revisions to the rules. More specifically, today we will be discussing the revisions to Rule 1.7, which are proposed to implement Colorado Senate Bill 21006, concerning the conversion of human remains to basic elements within a container using an accelerated process. With regard to the process for today's meeting, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the program's website by the close of business tomorrow. As this stakeholder meeting is held solely by webinar, please raise your hand by using the hand icon if you would like to speak, and we will unmute your line so you will be heard by everyone. Or you can type your comment in the question section and we will read it out loud. Before we start taking comments, I want to ask that anyone providing comments, please state your name and who you represent. Feel free to provide either general comments on the rule changes or specific comments on the proposed rule language. Please limit your comment to no more than it and try not to repeat something that was already said. Stating you're in full agreement with someone else works fine, and we can note that. If you are using audio through your computer, please remember to put any phones on vibrate or turn them off. And whether you are using computer or phone audio, try to keep background noises to a minimum when speaking. So before we get started with receiving stakeholder comments, as I mentioned, Zen Mayhew, the program director, is also on the call. So I am going to turn it over to Zen for some more information about the legislation and the rules.
Thanks, Darcy. This bill authorizes human remains to be converted to soil using a container that accelerates the process of biological decomposition, also known as natural reduction. And the bill prohibits selling or offering to sell the soil, commingling the soil of more than one person without consent, commingling the human remains of more than one person without consent of the person with right of final disposition, and using the soil to grow food for human consumption. The definition of natural reduction in the bill is simply the contained accelerated conversion of human remains to soil, and beyond that doesn't identify the process to follow for natural reduction, and we're aware that there may be some additional information needed. We've received numerous comments about the process, and we have consulted with the CFDA about the process. And just at the outset, I want to say that the director's authority to promulgate rules is limited. And so we're happy to hear comments today. But in terms of the process for natural reduction, there may be a need for additional information that can only come from the legislature. The director's authority to promulgate rules doesn't allow for revisions to statutory language. So just want to say that at the start, and we can potentially address during the meeting any other clarification needed on this point, but the director's authority to promulgate rules is just limited. So Darcy, I think we can move forward unless there's some initial questions. We're here to get comments on the proposed rule revisions, and I think we're ready to hear those.
All right, thank you, Zen. So as I mentioned, so now I showed while Zen was talking a little bit of the bill, Senate Bill 21006, which is the legislation that the director is required to implement. And so now you're seeing on your screen, I'm going to scroll down to where the redlining begins. You're seeing the draft rules that are being considered, and what the purpose of this stakeholder meeting is to get feedback regarding these proposed changes and any other changes that would need to be made in rule to implement this new legislation. So at this point, we will take stakeholder comments regarding the proposed rule changes and any other changes that would need to be made to the rules in response to this legislation. So you can provide comments by either raising your hand and we can unmute your line, or you can type into the question function and we can read your comments or questions out loud for the recording. So we received a written comment from Ed Gazvoda. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. With Ed Gazvoda, fireless cremation. Is composting covered by Department of Public Health and Environment, Solid and Hazardous Waste Commission, Hazardous Materials and Waste Management Division regulations pertaining to solid waste sites and facilities, 6 CCR 10072, Part 1. I do not know the answer to that question. Then I don't know if you do.
I think the bill itself addresses disposal and only states that it be done in a respectful manner, and it cannot be disposed or used, I should say, to grow anything intended for human consumption.
Okay, thanks, Zen. Feel free to follow up if you have any other questions. We received another written question from Dave DeNovellis, representing Recompose. When will folks be able to offer this service?
The bill's effective date, I believe, is September 11th. I'll confirm quickly, but I believe that's the effective date of the bill.
Okay, we've received just a comment from Daniel Ziskin, the natural funeral, and I'm not seeing anything else there. Another written question from Ed Gazvoda. Is there any oversight to the pathogens remaining in the compost?
For what remaining in the compost? Sorry, Darcy.
For the pathogens remaining in the compost?
I don't think the language of the bill addresses anything that might remain in might be in the remains. I don't believe there's any language specific to that in the bill.
Thanks, Ben. And just to piggyback off of that, so the purpose of the meeting today is to receive feedback regarding the proposed changes to the rules, because as Ben mentioned, the director does not have any authority to change the statute. So what we need from stakeholders is any feedback regarding clarifying and explaining the legislation that can be done in rule under the director's statutory rulemaking authority. So let me see, we have a couple, and I see there's at least one hand raised. So I'm going to get through these written comments, and then I will go to the raised hand. Katrina Spade recompose. In the proposed rules, should crematory be edited to say reduction facility?
I don't know if we want to respond to every comment today, Darcy, but the bill excludes natural reduction from the definition of cremation, and so they are defined separately in the bill. So reduction facility is not a defined term in the bill.
Okay. I'm just going to put that comment in here since it's specific to the to potential rule changes. Okay, Daniel Ziskin. Perhaps the restriction on using the compost for growing food should have a time limit, such as one growing season. Suppose you put compost on a field to grow alfalfa and then tomatoes in the next season. Is that okay? So the statute is where the restriction is on growing food. And the statute says, and I understand what you're saying about the time, but the statute says that it's unlawful to use in the course of a person's business, vocation, or occupation the soil produced by the natural reduction of human remains to grow food for human consumption. So the director doesn't have the authority to change that or add the time. That would require a legislative change. Ed Gazvoda, can a family perform this process, or does a funeral director need to be involved? I don't know the answer to that. I would need to look at the bill to see if there's clarification on that. I don't know if you know the answer to that, Ben.
I don't believe the bill requires a funeral director to be involved, but the process is regulated through the Mortuary Science Code. So a person would need to hold, or the reduction would be required to occur in a facility that holds a registration, either as a funeral home or as a crematory. I think either registration would qualify.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Stephanie Blackstock, disclosure statement required to 12-135-1051 Q and S regarding unlawful to sell remains. I believe that says, or remains, it's RMAINS. Katrina Spade, recompose. Apologies on my last question. Sounds like reduction facilities are under funeral establishment in the statute. Stacy Kleinman, does the organic reduction facility need to be registered through DORA?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to go to people with hands raised. So thank you for your patience while I navigate there. Okay, Stephanie Blackstock, CSDA, you are good to go. It looks like we should be able to hear you.
Great, thank you. Again, this is Stephanie Blackstock. I'm with the Colorado Funeral Directors Association. So first, I'd like to comment on the proposed changes to the rules, which I think specifically addressed identification of remains. And I concur with the proposed changes that you have outlined here regarding the identification tag and that the custody and that sort of thing. So that's the first comment I will make. Secondly, to my previous comment is that, you know, in the statute under the unlawful acts, and it says to sell or offer to sell the soil produced by natural reduction of human remains to any person. So I believe that because when those remains are returned to a family, it is still illegal for them to sell those. Is that, am I interpreting that correct? And if that is the case, perhaps a written statement should be provided to the consumer that chooses natural reduction that they're not eligible to use that soil or also to use for human consumption. Do you have the authority to do that?
Thank you for your comments. So as far as DORA is concerned in our jurisdiction, so we regulate the license and the business, right? So we don't have any authority over the individuals who receive the remains. Then did you want to add anything on that?
I think that's correct. The authority to enforce the Mortuary Science Code is limited to those who hold a registration or are required to hold a registration. So once the remains transfer to a next of kin or whoever has that, who has possession of the remains, the authority of DORA and the director to enforce the Mortuary Science Code ends. So I think what you're addressing is the possibility of a person using those remains in violation of the Mortuary Science Code. And if that occurred, DORA would have no ability to sanction or otherwise discipline that individual.
Okay, understood.
And I just wanted to say too, sorry to interrupt you, just that we can't provide any type of legal advice either. All we're speaking about is what we regulate under DORA. So I think if your question was somewhat legal in nature, it may be helpful to talk to an attorney about your concerns. But as far as like what we have jurisdiction over and what we receive complaints about and have the director has authority to discipline, it's only with people or businesses who are licensed or registered.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have one more question, and that is also regarding you know, some clarity around on page, if you look at page 6 of the Act, it's under V. If natural reduced remains are not claimed by the person with the right of final disposition within 180 days after natural reduction, a funeral establishment, funeral director, or mortuary science practitioner may dispose of the remains in an unrecoverable manner by returning the remains to the earth in a respectful manner. And we don't, you know, disagree with that premise. It's just the hows and the whys of, you know, how that may be done. And, you know, is there any authority of your department to provide some clarity around acceptable means to do that. Our concerns have been that the matter that comes out of this process is equivalent to about a cubic yard of soil matter, which is basically what fills into the back of a pickup truck. And so there's also a requirement in the actual mortuary science code to transfer remains in a certain manner. And, you know, are those remains in a container? Are they open to natural air? So when you drive down the street, those remains are blowing out the back. Is there a requirement of the establishment that is actually holding those remains to store them in a covered container? Or, I mean, can they just simply dump a load of soil matter out in the parking lot behind the building? So there are some questions around that whole element of, you know, how to manage and store those remains that maybe not addressed in the specific rules, but, you know, maybe addressed more broadly in the mortuary science code. Does that make sense?
I think
It
that's a
certainly
good
does.
question, Stephanie.
Yeah.
Sorry, Darcy. Go ahead.
No, go ahead then.
I was just going to say that the way that the enforcement of the mortuary science code happens is through a legal process, and so your question brings up a lot of details that would be needed to address it. And I think if the business is disposing of remains and DORA receives a complaint about how remains are being disposed of, DORA would investigate and would have to make a determination as to whether that disposal was respectful. And as you may or may not know, that's not a legally defined term. And so there may be room for some clarification there. I appreciate your comment, and I think we'll have to do some consulting with the Attorney General's office to see if there is a need for some clarification there, and if that clarification could appropriately occur under the director's authority. So for the comment, I think the hypothetical could also, I think it's also helpful just to recognize that once those remains change hands and are no longer in the possession of the funeral home or the crematory, then disposal is, I would say, largely outside of the ability of DORA to enforce the requirements of the mortuary science code. And so who is doing the disposal becomes an important question. But I think the question also, it brings up, where is the line for respectful, and what does that look like, and perhaps more importantly, what does that not look like?
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, and hopefully you can see the screen. I put the statute in there and your question directly in there, so you can see if that's accurate, the way I have it written. I'm going to go ahead and place you back on mute, but feel free to raise your hand again if you want to add any more. And then I'm going to lower your hand as well. Dave De Novellis, you are self-muted. Dave De Novellis, I show your hand is raised. if you would like to provide comments, you'll just need to unmute on your end. Clicking. I'm going to go ahead and lower your hand. And then if you want to speak, then feel free to raise your hand again. Oh, thank you. I saw your comment. And I think I checked back to see the written comments. We've read through all of the ones that we've received up until now. I don't see any other people with hands raised, but I'm going to scroll through to make sure I'm not missing anybody. Okay, written question from Dave Danavelis. When will people be able to register with DORA for this service?
Applications are now available for registration as a funeral home or a crematory.
Jamie Sarsh, will you send applications? Are they available on the website then, or?
Yeah, on the website, there's a page for the Office of Funeral Home and Crematory Registration, and on that page, you'll find applications.
I have another hand raised by Daniel Ziskin. I've unmuted you. You're self-muted. Daniel Ziskin. You would like to
Oh, yep.
speak?
Hi. Can you hear
Hi.
me?
Yes.
So this is about those forms. If we're an existing crematory, do we just add the service and for natural reduction, or is it a separate crematory for this process?
You'll just need to add the service that you offer. You list those upon registration, and as those services change over time, you should update your registration.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Okay. We have another written question from Stephanie Blackstock, CFDA. Is there an option when registering as a funeral establishment to specify that natural reduction is a service being offered at that location?
Yes, one of the questions on the registration is what services do you offer? So I think that would appropriately be included there.
I'm just looking to see if we have anyone else with raised hands. While we look and just wait a little bit to see if anyone else wants to provide any feedback. I know some of you already have, but if you would like to provide any written comments, you're welcome to do that as well. The recording and the written comments are all taken into consideration by the director during this process. The comments, please send them to Dora_DPO_rulemaking@state.co.us. that email address is on the notice for the meeting today, that's posted on the program's website and also sent out via blast email to all registrants and stakeholders. And we will accept those up until the date of the rulemaking hearing. So I am not seeing anyone else with hands raised. Ben, can you check too, just to make sure I'm not missing anybody?
I do see a hand for Dave De Novelis.
Okay, let me get there. I'm not showing on mine. Do you want to unmute?
Sure. Give me 1 second here. All right, Dave, you're unmuted on my end. It looks like we should be able to hear you.
Thank you. And then so I would just had a question. I know Washington has, you know, has been doing this for a year or so. So there are some rules around process, but I'm not sure if they fit with the, you know, the statutory language. But perhaps we could, you know, look at those and send some stuff over and see if that fits into what you're looking for as well.
We have received some comments regarding process, and some of the comments suggest statutory changes, and the director doesn't have authority to make those revisions. That would have to go to the legislature. And so the director in this case doesn't have authority to further restrict how natural reduction is defined by the bill, and that simply says the contained accelerated conversion of human remains to soil. So happy to have your comments with that caveat.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. So until 10:34, monitor to see if we receive any other written comments or if anyone else raises a hand. Otherwise, we will close out the meeting if no one else wants to provide any feedback. I'm not seeing any other comments or any individuals who have raised a hand, so I will go ahead and wrap up. Thank you for participating in today's meeting. All comments and program recommendations will be provided to the director for review and consideration before the director deliberates on the final versions of the rules at the permanent rulemaking hearing, which is tentatively scheduled for September 2nd, 2021. Please remember that we always post all rulemaking and stakeholder activities under the public notices section of the Funeral Homes and Crematories program website. So you're welcome to check there for the latest information. That concludes the stakeholder meeting, and we thank you again for your participation. We are going to end the webinar now.